with that, I'm going to get things kicked off. First off, let's just do some introductions right on the table, starting with your name, the district you represent, committees you may serve on, and legislative priorities or anything else you would like to share just to kick us off before we move to some of the questions.
Dan Dawson, Senate District 10, which is all of Carver Lake and most of Council Bluffs. I happy to be here today. My committees I sit on is I chair the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Tax Writing Committee. I sit on Judiciary, Veterans Affairs, and Admin Rules and Grant Committee. For the legislative calendar, this next Friday is supposed to be the day that we would hopefully adjourn. Specifically, it's when the per diem runs out. And I would say that we are not going to meet that mark this year. We have a lot of big issues in front of us that we're going to have to resolve one way or the other. Some we probably can't get resolved, and some we might not be able to get pushed next year. We still have to come up with budgets as well too. I think last time we were here, Leader Windschitl made a comment about a lot of bills out there. We have to ask ourselves a lot of times as to, are these bills really worth it? Smaller government, if we don't run as many bills, well, now we kind of pay the price for some of that stuff a little bit because some of these bigger issues out there that we haven't had time to really get the full focus on, buried on some other things, now we have to get resolved. Just some of the bigger ones out there from just my personal standpoint. I know everyone has their viewpoint out there. Probably the biggest thing we need to get resolved before the end of the year, aside from the budget, reality, Constitution is something we're required to do. We could actually do a budget tomorrow and walk away and come back and do everything else next year, but I think we still have opportunities to do some good things out there too. So aside from budget, property taxes is probably the biggest thing we need to get resolved, I think, from both chambers going forward. And I know this next week, Chairman Kaufman over in the House Ways and Means Committee, we're going to sit down and make a lot of decision points as well as talk to our caucuses too, and figure out what the pathway is forward. I think we have a good possible pathway forward. We just got to make sure that we're thoughtful and eyes wide open about the opportunities and solutions that we can put forward here. Another thing personally I would want to get resolved is more of a Senate thing this year. Pharmacy benefit manager reform. The House, getting credit, they've pushed forward some bills the last few years. We've had some consternation inside the Senate or different viewpoints on that. It's something I wholeheartedly have been pushing for since 2021 when I filed the first bill in the Senate standpoint. I think we're almost there to prep system to get something really good done. But this is a system, this is a bipartisan issue as well too at the federal level. PBMs, they did serve and still do in some aspects serve a valid purpose, but they are the entity that is, I think that the pendulum has switched more to where they are incurring more cost to the healthcare system as opposed to making the healthcare system cheaper. So those are two big things I would really like to see. We got some other issues out there as well too. Energy bill, that's one out there. Governor's tax credit reform bill. There's probably some other ones out there too. But the two things I really want to focus on these last remaining days. And again, we will not be done this week. Maybe 2 weeks. We'll see. I don't know. But property tax reform and PBM reform, I just think we have to get done before we walk out there. Probably some other issues too you are engaged in, but just from our standpoint. So thank you.
Okay. Hello everyone again. Thank you all for coming out. I love to see the civic engagement. Genuinely, I love the fact that we've got such a big turnout that we've had to move to a bigger area. Representative Josh Turek, I represent all of Carter Lake and portion of Council Bluffs, along with Representative Siegrist. I serve as the ranking member on the Health and Human Services budget. I'm also on Health and Human Services policy, Natural Resources, State Government, and Veterans Affairs. At the moment, we're moving towards budget been spending an awful lot of time now on the HHS budget, which is significant, trying to make sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable in our society, Medicaid, making sure that the elderly, the disabled. Some of our priorities in that, I know with myself and Representative Meyer, is to make sure that we don't see any reduction or cuts on the behavioral health side of things. We finally put some serious resources towards that, so we don't want to see that regressing. Also for me, one of my major priorities is to make sure that we see some additional funding go towards Medicaid reimbursement for dentistry, particularly for poor kids and for disabled individuals, just to make sure that they have some level of oral care. Another one would be to see us put a little bit of funding or resources towards the HCBS waivers. Right now, we've got, I think it's 23,000 disabled individuals that are on waiting lists, sometimes as long as 7 years, going to 7.5 years right now for the intellectual disability waiver. Nursing home funding right now, this is absolutely critical. Right now, we are looking at trying to add an additional $25 million towards them. We have lost 31 of our nursing homes over the last 4 years. It really, really is something critical that we make sure that we put some additional funding towards that. So I know that on the House side of things, we're really going to fight to keep that $25 million going for them. And something that I've tried to make a lot of noise about year after year is putting additional funding towards addressing our cancer epidemic in this state. Only state with a growing cancer rate, second highest rates. We still put very, very little state appropriation towards this. 2 years I've run the bill to put at least $1 for every Iowan into cancer research to go to the University of Iowa. That's something that I hope ultimately will make it into our bills. That's where I spend a lot of my time and energy. I'm really, really grateful to hear Senator Dawson talk about PBM. That is a huge, huge issue that is really, really crushing our rural pharmacies in particular. Here in Council Bluffs, we ended up losing a pharmacy that had been open for more than 100 years, and it really was putting a lot of additional costs on the individuals. You know, we shouldn't be in this country, we shouldn't be making a decision on do we pay our bills or do we take our insulin or do we take our pharmaceuticals. And PBM reform would be a huge, huge step in the right direction to address some of these issues. Thank you all for being here.
All right, good morning, everyone. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Matt Windschitl. I serve House District 15, which is all of Harrison County and the middle portion of Potawatomi County, wrapping around the Senator's District and the Representative's District. As we talked about, next week is supposed to be the end date, and I agree with Senator Dawson. We're not going to hit that mark. There are a lot of heavy issues out there that we still have to deal with, including the budget, and that is always the biggest consternation that we have in the legislature is trying to fund the priorities that Iowans expect us to fund, but at the same time passing a balanced budget. We touched on PBM reform. I too am encouraged to hear Senator Dawson say they're getting closer in the Senate. The House has been working on this for a long time. And this boils down to keeping your pharmacies open and available. We're not just talking about your big chain pharmacies. We're talking about your mom and pop pharmacies. And so we've been working on it in the House for many years. And I believe that we're getting closer to an agreement. So hopefully we can get that across the finish line. We've got a bill ready to go in the House. Just waiting to see what the Senate proposal will be. I know they're trying to iron out some kinks. And so we're looking forward to seeing what they send to us so we can get it accomplished and down to the governor's desk. As we talk about the budget, one of the biggest problems I have, and Josh touched on it, and when I use their first names, I mean no disrespect to them. It's just because we're all friendly and we all work together. But Josh touched on it, is the Medicaid rebasing for our nursing homes. In the governor's original budget proposal, she proposed an increase of $25 million in the rebasing effort. And my caucus is dedicated to trying to hit that number of $25 million. Far too often we see our nursing homes closing, as Josh referenced, and we need places for our elderly to have that long-term care that they need, deserve, dignity and respect. And so we're fighting hard for that. The other thing that's kind of a glitch in the budget negotiations right now is making sure our community colleges are fully funded. The House is coming in with a proposal between $8 and $9 million to make sure our community colleges, like Iowa Western here in Council Bluffs, can have the funding they need in order to provide the quality secondary education that our community needs and deserves. Our community colleges are a backbone here in Iowa, and they're fantastic. We need to make sure that we're continuing to fund those at a level that is sustainable for them. The other thing that's kind of getting a little bit of more intense negotiations is last year when we passed the teacher pay increase, we also had included paraeducator pay in that. And we had made a commitment as a body, as a legislature, that we were going to continue to fund those paraeducators. So right now, the House has got built into our budget an additional $14 million to continue the commitment that we made. Unfortunately, that is not encapsulated in some of the other budget proposals that we've seen. So we are fighting hard for that, as well as many other items. There's plenty of other issues I could talk about, but I didn't come here to talk your ear off. I came here to listen to you and provide feedback. So thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for that. Before I get started with some audience questions, I was thinking this morning a real success story of what it could look like when we work together across the aisle. I'm just going to read right off of this because I wasn't aware of it until this morning. But I would like to just share that the people wish to express sincere gratitude to Iowa legislators, Senator Dawson, Representatives Windschitl, Siegrist, and Turek, for their exceptional bipartisan efforts in supporting House File 710, the Iowa Dock Freedom Bill. The Iowa Dock Freedom Bill brings Iowa in line with the other 49 states, allowing private dock owners the choice of roof materials to protect their watercraft. These legislators have worked diligently to support a bill that benefits all of Iowa and holds significant importance for Council Bluffs and Carter Lake. We encourage constituents to continue the efforts of these leaders by voicing their support of HF 710 to govern the roads. So, those bills, it's just always been that way. With a little hard work and determination, we got things changed every year.
Say a few
Words on that. I wasn't aware. I had seen the image on the brow that said something about Turek's bill ends up making it to the finish line. I want to be clear. I got an enormous amount of help on that. But, you know, it was initiated. To be clear, I do not live in Carter Lake. I do not own a boat. I do not own a dock, as was erroneously stated in the Senate. I worked on this. I was made aware of this issue from constituents in Carter Lake, so try to get a public forum there, and was made aware of the variance in standard and the confusion that was taking place when you have a difference in standard from neighbor to neighbor. So that was the impetus of the bill to originate. I got a lot of help from Representative Siegrist. Honestly, Senator Dawson helped a lot of making sure that we got that through the Senate. Leader Windschitl helped an enormous amount to make sure that we were able to get that through the House, and so I'm very grateful to him. We had to run that as a bounce back. I got an enormous amount of help from Representatives Harris and Representative Walsh from the cross aisle. So this was truly a bipartisan effort. That should not say Turek's bill. That should say a lot of people's names on there, in particular, every single member of Natural Resources in the House really put in a lot of work on that.
Okay, into the audience questions now. The first one coming from Carmen Kinney on the topic of school funding. When will school funding be passed, and how much money will public schools get?
Well, we've already passed SSA. The House would come in at a higher number than what the governor and the Senate had come in at. Through the course of negotiations, we have stuck to our guns as long as we could, but we knew we needed to get SSA done. So the final agreement came down to a 2% supplemental state aid with additional dollars for per pupil equity and transportation equity. We would like to have seen more, but we got to a point where we had to get that number settled. So that is the first issue that we always have to deal with before we can get to the rest of the budget negotiations. So we're continuing to, we got that done, but we're continuing to push more, as I touched on, the paraeducator pay, and trying to make sure that those dollars are continuing to be there, because without those paraeducators, our teachers have a much heavier workload in the classrooms and throughout their day. So continuing to try and fight for more, but that's where we're at. The issue settled, and it's done. The governor's already signed it, I believe.
Any other comment?
No, I mean, Matt said, we got that done probably about a month ago or something like that, but in the approach budget, there's still some outstanding issues there that we got to resolve, to include the paraeducator issue.
Yeah, this one's done 2%. Ultimately, the House is with Windschitl been stated 2.25 is where we want it to be. I think from my side of the aisle, we want it to be at 5%. You know, I'm going to be a broken record up here. I think that we've got to make this our #1 priority, is supporting our public schools. I think without a doubt, the greatest indicator of future success in life is access to quality education, and that should be whether you're rich or poor, regardless of where you're at in the state. And, you know, especially in a community like ours, we're going to end up at 1% SSA just because we lost 47 kids to the private schools. So we've got to do more, and I think we need to make this the #1 priority in our state.
Staying on the topic of education in private schools, why are private schools not required to adhere to the same rules and regulations as public schools are mandated by state law, since the public schools are receiving my tax dollars, which require a certain amount of adherence?
I can kick that one off here. I mean, this is just going to be a philosophical difference, right? I know people on both sides, there's never going to be any bridge to go. What I would say is this: is historically, private schools have always received public tax dollars, different form, but whether it be tuition textbook credit, transportation sharing. I think that there's a lot of public awareness that it wasn't there prior to the 2023 bill, that there's a lot of support for private schools for public tax dollars. Now, when the ESAs comes on board, one of the reasons for ESAs was not to create private schools and public schools, was to give people choice, right? There's a lot of choices out there, and that was a part of education reform. Now, I know some people have different viewpoints, and they're totally fine in their opinion there, but from a legislative body, and this was campaigned on for 3 years, ever since 2021, this was the central campaign issue in 2022, was coming out of COVID. We want to make sure that parents had the opportunity to get the best education that they deemed appropriate for their children. And so born out of that was the ESA. And I know that some people will just never like that. Some people are going to take that to the end of the road and say it's the best thing ever. We'll walk down there and find out differences, right? But what we did was say, whether it be a charter school, which public schools do have charter schools out there, homeschool, private school, that people pay taxes, and in that quest to give their kids the best educational choice that they deem appropriate, to let them keep some of their tax money and support that education option. Now, when it comes to why not the same standards, well, we didn't do the ESA program, and we haven't started this charter school effort just to have all schools end up becoming the same thing in the end, right? That's the beauty of a diverse education system here in Iowa. It's where we want to get custom tailored to what the parents think best for their kids. You start slapping all the same rules and all these things, and there should be some minimum standards. I'm not saying that, but I think some of the public dialogue out there is kind of perplexing me a little bit, because what would be the point of giving these other education opportunities the opportunity if we're just going to essentially, in the end, make everyone a public school in the end? I think it's probably counterproductive, and there's a reason. And if parents take their kids to a different school, a private or a charter or, homeschool, and not necessarily homeschool, but maybe some of the micro schools out there, right? If those standards really do raise the quality of education, if these other schools don't, well, they're going to take their kids back to the public school. I mean, that's the point of the system. No one's getting forced into anything. And eventually, hopefully, rising tide raises all boats, and that's what we want to see here in the state, a little competition, have everyone work a little bit harder in all these aspects we just talked about, and raise our education standards.
Matt, I'll give you the last word since I went last time. I'm going to sound like a broken record again on this one. I've been pretty clear. I'm for public dollars staying with public schools. Again, I have nothing against private schools. I actually went to private school myself for 3 years when I was in middle school, because I was bullied so badly when I was in public school for a bit. So they serve a valuable purpose. However, I don't think that we should be giving hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, at this point, I think from the most recent metric that I've seen was 85% of the families and individuals that are getting the ESAs. We're already in private schools, especially now that we've taken the cap off. I mean, essentially we're allowing taxpayers to pay for the richest families in the state to go to private schools. They are here though now, and so now I think to some degree, we need to shift the conversation of, now that they're here, how do we make this better, or look at some of the issues that we're creating. One of the big ones for me is the lack of an anti-discrimination policy that's in place. That these private schools, if they're going to take public dollars, then I think they should be required to take individuals with a 504 plan or individuals with disabilities, or not be able to discriminate against you just because you maybe believe in a different sect or religion. I also think that we should have some level of oversight on the funding. I think that it's important that if we're going to give them public dollars, to make sure that that's going to the education services and not just to buy new football equipment or things of that nature. I also think that it's important that we look at maybe capping on the tuition, or we've heard from around the state that they've grandfathered in a previous amount to the former students, and now to the new students they're charging even more. So if they're going to be here, they're going to be taking our taxpayer dollars, and I think that they should be held to somewhat of the same standards, the same regulations, the same oversight as what we require from our public schools.
Private school that is receiving ESA dollars, number one, those are accredited private schools, just like the public schools are accredited by the Department of Education. So there is oversight in that regard. As far as how the dollars flow through, this is not a system where somebody gets a check and goes out and spends it how they choose to. The parents have to apply for the education savings account to the school, private school that they're choosing to send their student to. And then those dollars flow from the state directly to the school. It never goes into the parent's hand. And the first thing that has to be paid for is tuition. Then after that, there are other educational needs that if the tuition is not taking up the entire education savings account, that it can be utilized for. The other thing that I'll point out is what we've done with ESAs is a small fraction of what we put into public education. In our $9.4 billion budget that we're proposing this year, over half of that $9.4 billion, and that's just your income taxes, your sales taxes, your use taxes, over half of the $9.4 billion goes into education. Everything else comes after that. HHS, Medicaid, public safety, you name it. Every other aspect of the state budget comes secondary to what we're putting in to our K-12 institutions, our region institutions, and our community colleges. So just keep that in mind. Over half of $9.4 billion has been the commitment that we've made to public education and secondary education. Those are your tax dollars, folks. Those are going to help make the best and brightest future for the next generation. So we're continuing to make the investment. And in the time that I've been in the majority since 2011, House Republicans have never cut education funding. Not once. Last time education funding got cut was in 2010 under a Democrat trifecta. Since Republicans have been in control, we have increased education funding to the tune of over $1 billion. Right? And right now, just do the math, $9.4 billion in the overall state budget. Over half is going to education. And we've increased public education dollars by over $1 billion since that time. Keep that in mind. We are funding your priorities. We are funding the next generation, and we are trying to help our K-12 institutions be the best places they can be for the education of our students.
Just a quick follow-up to my good friend, Leader Windschitl. We are friends, legitimately. Just one little bit of context, though, is remember that we are spending in Iowa about $1,200 less than the national average per pupil, right? We have dropped from #1 in public education down to whatever we are now, I think 22, 24. Also, additionally, if you look at our funding increase versus inflation, and I had my clerk go through there and do this since Republicans taken over, because you are correct, the last time when we cut it was under Colbert, it was under a Democrat administration. Or if you look at the funding increase versus inflation, it's looking about like a 6.5% decrease. So I think that that's important for the overall context.
Thank you. Next question. Again, staying on the topic of education, this one from Dorian Cruz. How do you expect schools to enforce the cell phone ban?
We're just going, sure. Yeah.
Look, I think that the cell phone bill was very important. What we were doing is we were just requiring basically a basement, just requiring every single school district or school board to have some policy to at least restrict cell phone regulation. Now ultimately I believe in self-rule and local control, and so what our superintendents decide, what our school board decides, I think is up to them. I know in Council Bluffs, we've already got some form of policy. We just wanted to add some level of clarity and remove some ambiguity on this. The metrics are really, really clear. You can look at the study that was done by Harvard, by the Pew Institute. It's looking at 74% is saying that this was having a negative impact, cell phone usage, on children's attention span. 70% negative impact on their mental health. This is really, really serious. And additionally, if you're looking at what's happening with AI and with cheating, it's not only the mental health, it's not only the distraction area. You know, one of the challenges that we have is that technology is constantly changing and evolving. And then we have a problem where we have this inefficient ability with legislation. Ultimately, when we're trying to legislate technology, we are building the plane as we are flying because we can't always keep up in a reasonable time frame. We are looking at what's happening with cell phones, and it's now really, really clear that this is having a negative impact on our children. So we have to do something about it, as all of these other states are doing it. Now, what ultimately our local school boards and principals and superintendents decide, I think is up to them, and I'm fully in favor of that. But this is a great policy that's going to really provide positive impacts to our students.
I 100% agree. This is one of the funny little things at the Capitol about legislation. A lot of times, no doubt, the legislators start a process, or the governor starts a process around a topic or something along those lines, and then local officials react. I would tell you this is one of those situations where the reverse has actually occurred, where we were hearing from enough local officials across the state saying, please, you know, the reality, they need some air coverage, right? That's the reality. There's a lot of school boards, superintendents out there that were wanting to do something, but it seems like a lot of times they would be afraid to be the first persons to start that conversation, and knowing there might be some backlash. And so it's one thing they actually came to the legislature, as well as the governor, you know, proposed the bill, said we could use some help in having some unified standard across the state. And the standard was essentially, you have to have a policy, right? You can't just ignore it anymore for all the reasons that Josh mentioned. These things, they have a lot of great in our society. I would say overall is better for them, but there is a adverse consequence. And you know, I've been very clear on this topic all along. When a kid goes to school, they go to school to learn. They don't go to school to stick their head in this for 4 hours a day. So I think the question was, you know, how do we expect, you know, teachers to enforce it? Well, there's a lot of rules in this, you know, student handbook that teachers are asked to enforce, right? You know, we're just asking the school districts, which they supported, of just putting a policy in place, and we tailor for each district. But the reality, the Wild West is not having any policy out there at all, and the kids that he's on all day. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for our education. In some ways, talking about education funding in the previous question, there's a lot of things that we can do as policymakers, whether it be at the school board or at the state legislature, that you can do to positively impact a child's education that doesn't cost a dollar. And that's a free policy right there to get these things out of kids' hands for a few hours a day so they can actually focus on their education. Doesn't cost a dollar, and I can guarantee you in some instances it's going to raise the bar.
Okay. Josh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, he told me that he couldn't hear me on the microphone before, so I apologize if that was the case. Wasn't trying to shortchange anybody. Next time, somebody just throw a water bottle at me and tell me, hey, your microphone's not working. But everything you said, look, as a school school districts were asking for debt limits. They wanted a debt limit, but they didn't want it to be overly prescriptive to each school district. They wanted to know that they could enforce a policy, they could put a policy in place, but for each school district, it's going to be a little bit different on how they want to go about it. So we put the baseline in, that's what they were asking for. So as far as enforcement, that's going to be up to the local school districts and how they choose to operate and the plans that they put in place for the cell phone usage and however that's going to look. And there are certain exceptions to it for students that maybe they monitor their glucose or insulin levels on their phone. There are medical exceptions in there if they need to have that device with them, or if there's an emergency going on at home. So we put those exceptions in so school districts could be accommodating in those regards. I think it's a good policy, I'm glad we got it done.
Thank you. One last question, just came in on the topic of education. This one having to do with water quality and school funding. Anything going to happen with the pollution of the waterways? Do you believe 2% increase funding for schools is sufficient? And what happens next year with the voucher program? So on the topic of polluted waterways.
Okay, I'm going to go backwards here. It's not a voucher program. Vouchers are unconstitutional. It's an education savings account program administered by the Department of Education. We do not send a check out to any family. The money is housed within the Department of Education and it goes directly to the institution of learning. So what happens with it next year? We're going to continue to monitor it, and if we need to make adjustments, we will. As far as water quality goes, most of the 2% that we put into supplemental state aid or SSA, a lot of that goes directly into salaries and negotiations with the different teachers unions that are out there. As far as water quality, that's a statewide issue. That's not just in our schools. We're continuing to advance different water quality measures. We have put a lot of funding into making sure that we're not having runoff from farm fields or in rural districts, especially in your urban districts as well, where people are utilizing their lawn, and that's running down into the waterways. So we're continuing to look at that, monitor that, and I can't tell you off the top of my head how much funding we actually put into water quality, but we've had this discussion many times in the 19 years I've been in the legislature, and we do have a significant amount of investment going into making sure that our water is clean and it is of good quality, but it's an ever-evolving issue that we're continuing to look at.
Yeah, we won't retread the field on the education thing. Water quality wise, like Matt said, we actually have, I mean, every year we're dealing with that out there to some extent. I can tell you the biggest topic that we're trying to address behind the scenes right now, in terms of water quality, is just our water treatment plants here across the state. Because of EPA rules and a variety of other things out there, for a town to upgrade, I mean, we're pretty lucky here in Council Bluffs, I gotta say that, but there's a lot of horror stories across the state. For a lot of these, our cities out there, or these treatment plants, for them to upgrade those, I mean, it's tens of millions of dollars because of, a lot of things going on federal level wise and have been going on for years and everything. Some of these towns do not have the valuation of property tax base or the volume of, whether it be residents and or businesses there that would be a high user to just upgrade their system or replace the old antiquated system. And that's a huge policy concern for us across the state. I live in our development authority. There's conversations. They got some bills out there right now, in one bill in particular there, trying to figure out how we can lower the interest rates, how we can support some of these upgrades out there for these issues wise, because it's just, if we don't help these treatment plants, then, water quality will deteriorate. But it's a tough issue, right? It's really a tough issue out there. And again, it's one of those things that doesn't make the top 3 bullet points you read on the newspaper of the headlines of what we're dealing with. But at the same time, too, I can tell you every year, there's always conversation behind the scenes. And there's a lot of other issues out there as well, too. But I just know, I mean, we're actually actively working on legislation right now, trying to figure out how we can support some of these treatment upgrades out there, because it's just not, it's not financially feasible without some type of state or federal assistance.
That's a huge issue in Iowa, is our water quality. In my time, since I've been in the legislature now, we've actually reduced the water quality sensor funding by $250,000. I think if you're to look at, where we're seeing the highest levels of cancer rates, and again, going and spending a lot of time with the University of Iowa there, the places that we're experiencing the highest levels with cancers in the rural communities. And as Matt mentioned, we've got to be careful with CAFOs, with the water runoff. Water quality is something that really ultimately affects us all. And I do think that there's a direct correlation to our water quality and our cancer rates in this state. I will say one good thing that we did do this year, though, in the House, is we have 50,000 lead pipes in the state of Iowa. And we passed a bill through the House that would require, for when you are selling a home, for it to be disclosed if you have lead pipes on there. I think that that's really important for people to have transparency on that. The EPA has mandated that we get rid of all of these lead pipes by 2036, and I think this was a really great bill, step in the right direction, so that homeowners know if they're going to be exposed to lead pipes, because this has really serious negative health impacts, and particularly on young individuals and on brain development. So that was a step in the right direction. I'm appreciative that we are voting on that in the House.
Thank you. The next couple questions have to do with executive privilege and transparency. First one from Scott Stewart on executive privilege. Do you think the governor's media prep emails should be on public records? If not, is legislation needed to establish the privilege?
I'll jump in on this one. As far as I know, everything the governor has in paper document or electronic document is FOIAable, so Freedom of Information Act. The only people that have privilege right now are us as legislators. You can't FOIA our emails or our phone records, and that is specifically so if I'm having a private conversation with, let's say, one of you about a personal matter that you don't necessarily want to be made public, that information doesn't get out, basically just because you talk to your legislator to try and address an issue. But I don't know that any of her communications are kept privileged. I guess I would have to go back and ask that question. I don't know if one of you other gentlemen, but I know like every communication I send to the governor, anything that I text or anything that I put in an email, whether it's to her or to her staff, when I send it, it's still FOIAable. If you send the information, it's not. So that's to protect you as a citizen to be able to have those conversations. But everything that goes to the governor's office, to my understanding, anybody can go out and request unless you gentlemen know something different. I would have to go see that news article. I'd have to see that because I know that, it's routine that state offices, whether it be the governor or others, they get asked all the time for that information. Okay, I was not aware of that. I apologize. Okay.
I don't have any context to that either, so.
Can you comment on the value of transparency in those communications?
I'll certainly weigh in on that. I think that it's important that we have as much transparency as we possibly can throughout all forms of government, from federal level to state level. I think that is of utmost importance. Don't want to impute anyone or anything, but we need to do everything that we can to prevent any form of corruption on either side of the aisle. And so I think that the best way to prevent that is to have transparency in all forms. And no one is above the law, regardless. That's not a governor, that's not a president, that's not us as legislators. And so I think as much transparency as we can have, obviously, and I would think that we all would say the same thing.
Yes, I agree. You want to have transparency, you want to know what's going on. So I agree with Josh. You want to know what your government officials are doing. Problems there.
Thank you. On that same topic of transparency, could there be more transparency about who really writes the bills? An example is the Bayer bill. An identical bill was defeated last week in Tennessee. Bayer lobbyists wrote the bill and then state legislators sponsored it.
I can't make the point.
I guess on the question of transparency, and I'm not gonna speak to that bill, but there's a lot of times where if you want to delve into a topic, you're going to speak to, a different state or a different organization that's seen the process go through different states, right? For instance, last week, actually, when was it? Gosh, these days run together here. On Monday, we ended up running a bill out of the Ways and Means Committee that put an excise tax on vape products as well as alternative nicotine products, right? And we're not the first state to do that. So when the bill initially came out of committee, of course, it comes to Ways and Means, the tax components are kind of odd and everything. So what do? Is I'm going to go to a couple of national resources, say, okay, how, so we don't have 50 different states taxing these products different ways, what seems to be the standard out there? And we end up modifying that bill to somewhat of a normalized tax structure to get those things beyond sales tax. So I guess I'm not sure what if the thrust is from the Bayer bill or whatnot. I don't know, you have to talk to the bill sponsors there, but that's not unusual, quite frankly. Unless we're the first one delving into something, more times than not, if you're going to do smart legislation, you should be talking to some outside groups, national groups, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned there to cut through some legislative process a little bit, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off of somewhat degree of what Dan has said, is that one of the advantages I think that we have as state legislators is that we've got 50 different ideas out there theoretically on how we can do things. I think that's the advantage that we have at the state level over the federal level, where it's just, this is what we're doing. It goes both good and bad. The Bayer bill, in my opinion, was a bad bill, and yes, was that being mimicked from other states? But also, I have taken some of my disability employment legislation, for example, my Work Without Worry bill, probably the bill that I've talked the most about and tried to work the most on. I built that legislation off of what was done initially in Colorado and then what was done in Tennessee. Because we can look at all these other models of what's happening and say, well, this state's doing a really, really good job on this, and this state's doing a really bad job. And if us as legislators, we're doing our job right, that's what we should be trying to do, is taking the best ideas from all the other states and trying to make this state the very best. In terms of transparency of who writes that, who's engaged, to some degree we have to all recognize that, there is some form of lobbying dollars that's involved in this. And ultimately, at times, whether legislation moves or doesn't move is based on those lobbying dollars and who's supporting the bill and who's not. And we all have to be smart enough to recognize that issue too. But what we are up here to do is to represent you guys. You're our constituents. That's who we're here to serve. Ultimately, not big business, not corporations, or not lobbyists, not campaign donors.
Not to get too nerdy with you, but I am a nerd when it comes to rules. When we write legislation, we have to go through our legislative services agency, and they write the ideas that we put down. It can be a simple idea like, we want to raise the speed limits on the road. Well, they go into the code and they find all the correct sections that we need to be amended in order to do that. There have been plenty of times where I've had an idea from a constituent that's a little bit more complex, and I will literally give the constituent, I will tell the drafter that is in charge of drafting those certain code sections. The drafters work for all of us, House, Senate, they're nonpartisan. So if Josh had a competing idea, the same drafter is going to be drafting legislation for his competing idea versus my idea. And so I've had times where I have constituents that I will literally tell the drafter, please go talk with this person. Here's their contact information. Take their idea and turn it into the policy proposal, and then we'll see where we go from there. And as you gentlemen referenced, like our LSA actually does go and reference what other states have done. They look at different organizations like NCSL, Council of State Governments. There's plenty of different national organizations out there that are basically think tanks that are nonpartisan, that they look at, okay, this happened in 15 other states, here's how they did it, here's how it might conform best to Iowa code, because each state writes their code a little bit differently. That's why we have to go through LSA to make sure that we're not missing something. Long ago, it used to be where legislators were handwriting amendments, and they would literally submit them to the chief clerk, and then that would become law. But that's far, far beyond where we're at right now. So we have those legal staff, and every one of them in LSA is an attorney. So they know where to go. It goes through a very lengthy drafting process. It goes through an editor, a re-editor, and then it comes back to us. So as far as writing legislation, I mean, it is very transparent, but it's also very uniform how we do it here in Iowa.
Okay, next question from Troy on the topic of Iowa West Foundation. Would you be in favor of abolishing Iowa West and instead block granting funds to local municipalities?
No.
I'm going to give you a legal reason why. It'd be impossible, I mean, I guess it'd be impossible to abolish Iowa West. When our casinos were set up years ago, and the way the construct of Iowa law is when it comes to gambling in Iowa, is that for a casino operator to come into the state, they have to also partner with a qualified service organization, QSO, to distribute some of their revenues to the QSOs. So that's the baseline. On top of that, Iowa West actually holds the license to one of our casinos in town, and they control the casino license. So it would be extremely, I don't know how legally you would be able to abolish Iowa West for the fact of just not only the construct of the law, but also they legally hold the operator's license or control it to the casino here in town. So.
Yeah, that's been said. No.
Okay, the last couple questions I have are centered around an energy bill and eminent domain. So one last opportunity if any of this conversation has led to you to have other questions or comments. We still have cards out there, so is that one more? But last call for questions from the crowd. Is that fair? Okay.
Can I do one? Can I just
Absolutely.
put one out there? We've got a bill out there, 617. Some of you may have seen me write about it. This was a bill for us to have TIF reform here. I appreciate Representative Windschitl helping us out. I had to call him about 8 o'clock at night when I was at dinner to be able to keep this thing going on through subcommittee, but I appreciate all his support. We ended up getting that unanimously through subcommittee and unanimously through Ways and Means Committee. I hope that we'll end up seeing that on the floor. This would really give us a chance to compete against Omaha. And this is something really, really important. In my lifetime, I realize in border communities, we have unique challenges, and all of us here on the council side of things, we have seen that. In my lifetime, I've seen Omaha double in size. It is now the #1 hottest housing market in the country, and yet we have failed to grow. We failed to provide, legitimate business growth. A lot of that is the lack of tools that we have at our disposal. They've done a better job on tax abatements. They've got land banks. They've got SIDs. They allow their TIF to be 20 years. This is a great bill that will allow us to compete with Omaha and to get some genuine development in place. This idea that we've got to expand this to a 20-year TIF, as long as it's within the city limits for more than 20 years, and to keep that the moderate to low income threshold to 20%. Right now that's tied to our county poverty level, which right now for us is about 50%. We can't get genuine development interest with that being the standard. So this was an amazing opportunity, and I will just say publicly right here, I think it is a fantastic idea that we develop Dodge Park. I think that that land was initially given to us by General Dodge, and it was for the public good. I can tell you that the 80% of people that don't golf, they get no value out of that whatsoever. The 1 in 5 Iowans that have disabilities like me, I get no value out of that whatsoever. I don't golf, I cannot golf. And I think for us to have the opportunity to be able to possibly have as many as 10, 11,000 people be able to come in, young professionals live right across the river, be able to go right downtown and be able to work and go to the old market. It's an amazing opportunity. Looking at generating revenue of $10, $20 million, it would literally be transformative for our community, and I'm 100% in favor of it, and I hope we're able to get this tip bill across the finish line.
What he said.
Excellent. Hey, next question from Doug on the topic of eminent domain and the CO2 pipe. With other states not moving forward on approval of CO2 pipeline and the concern of eminent domain with residents in Iowa, where do you believe this will settle?
Look, this is very complicated. We've got people on all sides of the eminent domain pipeline. The bottom line is, we in the House have passed numerous proposals, and this isn't any dig on Senator Dawson. He's not in control of their calendar, he controls ways and means over there. But we have sent numerous proposals to try and protect private property, landowner rights. To make sure that somebody's property is not taken away from them by the use of force or eminent domain by the government, specifically for private projects. Whether you agree with CO2 capture and sequestration, beside the point of protecting the private property rights. If you're going to allow government to come in and take your property willy-nilly, what's the point of having private property? What's the point of having freedom? So we have passed a lot of different ideas, a lot of different ways to try and address the carbon sequestration pipeline or carbon capture and sequestration, and they made it to the Senate, but the Senate has not reached consensus on it. We passed a very large package this year, and it was about, what, 2 months ago now, Josh? Something like that, a month and a half ago. And it was amended in the Senate. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I can speak on behalf of my caucus. As we're looking towards the end of session, this is one of those issues that is gotten to the boiling point where before we shut session down, before we adjourn, sign and die, my caucus wants to see meaningful reform in this regard to protect private property rights, plain and simple.
Yeah, it is what the pathway forward is, I don't know, honestly. This is one of those issues, and it's been a contentious one inside the Senate as well, too, right? Inherently, I don't like the use of eminent domain. I think it should always be used sparingly. But this is a huge agriculture issue, and I think probably in anyone's caucus, you see it play out behind the scenes. A very Republican or Democrat, it's a pretty tense issue behind the scenes. And this, this is an issue where government has created a problem, right? First of all, government says that we reserve a right to some extent to exercise eminent domain if we want to put it in our state or whatever, right? Then government comes in, and whenever they want to incentivize industry or an activity, they create a bunch of credits, tax credits, I should say, sorry. And with this, there has been a slew of tax credits at the federal level provided for a lot of renewable energies, to include ethanol and ethanol carbon sequestration. Coupled with that, you've got government in other states, i.e. California, that creates this carbon scoring, and for us to sell ethanol in those states, these ethanol plants now have to find a way to sequester the carbon, right? So, the crappiest thing about this whole issue is that people that just want to be left alone, and not have anything disturb their property, government has done its damn best to make this an issue to drag onto their property, right? Whether it be the federal credits, whether it be state actions on environmental regulations, and it is the biggest darn quandary I have seen up there. And we have a lot of, I'm not saying just an agriculture issue, but that's the reality of this, right? You know, the House has certainly taken a stance on it. In the Senate, there's a lot more diversity, I would say, inside the caucus on the issue. You know, it's just that balancing of how do you support a strong Iowa export economy and how do you ensure property rights. And as we've seen spill over into our points of personal privilege in Davis last week, on a few days now, this is an issue that's going to come front and center. How it would settle in the end, I don't know. You know, I know about our ag folks there. I don't sit on ag committee. I don't sit on some of these other things. So, you know, I weigh in on my opinion there. But the reality, I think there's going to have to be a kumbaya at some point in time of, you know, is there a balance that can be struck? Or is it simply cut out one side where to go to eminent domain can't be used for these particular purposes? And that's, you know, that's one thing kind of stinks a little bit as well too, because I can darn well guarantee if you ask any legislature back in the 70s who crafted that piece of legislation, I don't think any of them on the vagueness of what the carbon capture pipeline is being used for today, I don't think anyone would have, you know, believed that that would have been a proper use for what it's being used for today. But nevertheless, we got hundreds of millions of dollars flowing down from the federal government. We're getting squished by other states on their environmental rules, and here we have a hell of a fight inside the legislature. So.
Certainly is a complicated issue in that you've got Republicans and Democrats both on both sides of the issue. For me, if you were to break this down in its simplest form, I have been one of our most outspoken members, and I would tend to agree with Matt, in that I think that property rights are paramount. And I think that we should not be using eminent domain when it comes just for the benefit of corporations. And that's where my stance has been. And I've been one of the most vocal and outspoken about that. I actually pushed, even though we had people all over the issue last year when we ended up voting on this, I really lobbied hard to get every single Democrat to be in favor of this bill, because I think that it's that important that we need to stand for private property and for property rights. But I will say that this is a complicated issue. I believe in carbon sequestration. I think for the overall environment, that is a good thing. I have nothing against the pipelines themselves. I also recognize, as Senator Dawson alluded to, that given what is the federal scores now on this, Iowa, without a doubt, if you look at our overall economy, we have by far the most to gain or the most to lose off of this with our ethanol industry. So it is very important for our economy that we find some agreement on this. But I am not for the government coming in and mandating these farmers to put something that they're fundamentally against. I'm not for them coming in and confiscating their property if they're not for that. If they're for selling their property, that is perfectly fine. If you're going to put something in there for the common good, a road, that's understandable. But this is not. This is exclusively for a corporation, and I am not for eminent domain being used in that regard. And one last point on there is, you know, Senator Dawson said that this is an example of government getting away. I'll say also additionally that this is an example of why we need campaign finance reform. I would just say, without impugning anyone, if you follow the money, things start to make a lot more sense.
Thank you. Last question on the topic of energy. This one on an energy bill from Patricia. Do you support SF 585 as written? It seems to favor the utilities at the expense of the ratepayers.
Yeah, this would be the governor's energy bill in both chambers there. This is when I said that I started off by saying we have a lot of big issues to tackle here before the end of session. That is particularly one of them. To answer your question, no, I do not support it as is. I don't see any way that bill makes it out of either chamber as is, frankly, let alone getting down to the governor's office for a signature. There's a lot of complicated issues inside there, whether it be right of first refusal, whether it be integrated rate making plan. I would agree with you, Trish. inertia that we need. There's got to be some more consumer protections or consumer-oriented solutions inside that bill. And I'll leave it there at that. I want to give both chambers the ability to negotiate if there even is a pathway forward for that. But right now, I just think from a consumer standpoint, there's a lot of things that, and not, when I say consumer, I always try to, especially on tax policy, right, where income taxes, property taxes, from a mom and pop standpoint. I know there's a lot of large energy users out there that are consumers, and they have a fair amount to say as well too, but ultimately, from the scope of that bill, the way I would like to look at it is how is this actually going to lower the rates or at least stabilize the rates for any normal household in Car Lake or Council Bluffs, not just for some big fight between large energy users and large energy producers.
Bottom line is, I agree with Senator Dawson. I do not believe that this bill moves forward in its current form. We've had some lengthy discussions on it within our caucus to try and determine what the best path forward is. And the bottom line is, how do we help the ratepayers? How do we help reduce your energy costs? What's the best way we can go about that while still having good production, good transmission, and making sure that we don't have rolling blackouts or a lack of energy when you really need it? When you want the air conditioner on in the summer, or you want the heat blown in the winter, you're going to have baseload energy. But the consumer is where our focus as House Republicans is at, and trying to make sure that we are helping you. With inflation being as high as it is, the economy and everything costing more, we want to make sure we're saving you as much money as we possibly can. And so we are taking a very healthy look at this to figure out what is the best approach, what is the best path forward. There was a lot that was originally encompassed in the governor's initial proposal. I do not believe that all of that will make it across the finish line. Whatever we do pass, it's going to be with thinking of you, the ratepayer, keeping you at the top of mind, and how are we helping you, not just a big corporation or a monopoly like Mid-America or Lion Energy. We want to help you.
If that's the last question, we're going to end in bipartisan, unanimous fashion. I would tend to agree with both of those sentiments. One, I don't think that this is going to get across the finish line in the way that we currently have it. If we've got disagreement on the pipeline, we've got equal amounts of people all over the place on both sides of the aisle on right of first refusal by itself, let alone all the additional components that we've got in this. And so I think we're going to have to probably see some of these carved out in individually run as bills. I don't think we can have them all together in there and get enough support to get across the aisle. However, I would double or triple down on what they have said. For me, my calculus in this bill is what is ultimately going to make the rate, what is going to bring down the cost for you guys, for the constituents. That's what I care about in this circumstance. And so when I'm looking at whatever we end up seeing in this final form, that will be my calculus on whether I support this or not.
I got one follow-up. You can tell by our demeanor up here, we all have consternation with the bill to some extent there, but there is some good things in the bill too. And one of the things I do want to highlight is just this national mindset change on nuclear. And within the bill is basically clearing the way for micro-nuke to be placed here. Modular micro-nukes throughout, basically what you would see in U.S. Navy submarines co-located with a lot of our energy-producing facilities here throughout the state. The reason why that's really important is that it's a lot safer and it's a lot less wasteful than it was 30 years ago when we had these large nuclear plants. And the reality, as we move to more renewable fuel-oriented energy sources, those micro-nukes are very important to stabilize that base load through low wind times or cloudy times and stuff along those lines. So I just want to say there actually is a few good things in there. There's but we spend all our time on the bad stuff, which is the whole legislature. So.
One final question on the topic of age verification. A study published in Frontiers in Psychology shows a strong correlation of depression, compulsive behavior, and other mental health issues resulting from pornography use. What measures is the legislature taking to protect children from this addictive and harmful industry?
Well, we on the House side actually passed some legislation last year that would address this issue. We've got other proposals that are out there to try and make sure that anybody that's getting on an adult website or adult-themed website would actually have to prove age verification. But it gets very complicated because how do you do that? Do you have to have a driver's license? Are you putting that information in there? Do you have to produce a birth certificate? So we're trying to thread the needle on it. It just gets a little complex of how much personal private information are you putting into the internet, and could that then be used against you or used in a nefarious purpose? But we are trying to make sure that we're protecting our youngsters from not seeing the scourge of pornography, and it's just trying to thread that needle on First Amendment rights, but also protecting your personal private data.
Yeah. Sorry, but that's why we're not getting much of a squelch up here. Everything Matt said, additionally as well too, again, back to these things, we passed additional legislation on top of that this year from the same standpoint. I don't know where it's at right now, so where it's made to the House, but whether it be some of these online apps where kids are sending photos to, vice versa, whether it be child pornography or, the minors accessing adult there. We do, it's not unique to Iowa. It's certainly a national thing as well too, but Matt mentioned a few bills. I think we passed a few out of the Senate as well too, trying to address this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. In favor of the age verification. Again, in the same way that we talked about the cell phone usage in schools, and we look at the negative impacts on that. Kids shouldn't be exposed to this, and right now it's far too easy. Anybody can recognize that on the internet to be exposed to these issues. On the age verification, I believe in the House, we passed something. We only had one dissenter. It was out of the governor, actually. This is something that gets bipartisan support. Again, as technology continues to evolve and evolve at a very, very fast rate, we have to legislatively make sure that we're doing our best to keep up with this. Certainly not exposing our kids to any negative impacts, and certainly that's what this is.
Well, thanks everyone. We are at time now, and for the first time, I think we actually might have gotten through all of the questions. So I appreciate all of you coming out today. Before we end, we usually have some time for closing remarks, but I'd like to save some time for all of you to have time to chat with the representatives. They mentioned earlier we're not going to end the session on time, so look forward to hearing more as the legislature continues to work on these last ending budget items. On a personal note, I just want to thank Representative Windschitl, Senator Dawson, Representative Turek, and Representative Siegrist, who is not here, has been battling illness. We're all thinking about him. As we end the last legislative coffee, I just want you all to know, from my perspective and getting the opportunity to work with these individuals, we are well represented in Council Bluffs. As you can see, there's a lot of bipartisan work happening that we should all be very proud of. So I want to thank each of you individually, and Representative Siegrist and abstention for all that you do for our communities, and wish you luck in the rest of the session. So one last